And we're live. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this edition of No Capes. I am your host, Kayla Daniels, as always, and I am joined tonight by Anthony Ferrara, the one and only IRC Maxell. Say hi.
Hello, hello, hello. How is everyone doing this evening?
Everybody.
That's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, they can't answer, but we'll just assume that they're doing great. Okay, so it's a pleasure to have you on. I've wanted to get you on for quite some time now, and we've had hit and miss or two, but here you are finally. And we actually have some really good questions coming in tonight. So let's go ahead and get started with those. One of the first questions came in actually from Yitz, Code Rabbi on Twitter, and you and he are now co-workers. So one of his first questions was, what's it like to work with Code Rabbi?
It's scary.
How so?
He's very, very scary. No, I told him I had to bust on him. No, he's fantastic. Level of attention to detail and the way he works with people, like, I mean, there's no other way I can really describe it. It's been an absolute joy to work with, teaming up with him in terms of leveling up the engineering team and kind of really pushing everybody to be their absolute best. He's been absolutely amazing. To say anything else would really make it sound like overly corny, but that's honestly how I feel. It's really, really cool.
Well, that's good. I hear you guys are doing amazing things over at Grovo. And you certainly have a pretty talent-packed team between the two of you, as well as a number of your other developers. And for anyone who doesn't know, you were previously at Google in New York City. What made you leave Google for Grovo?
So it was a whole host of factors. It wasn't just, any one thing I can really point. I think a large part of it was the right career move for me. I was so when I joined Google, I had kind of made an experiment in terms of where I wanted to go with my career. Before Google, while I was at NBC and all my jobs prior, I was kind of walking this architecture track, walking this management track. I had managed a fair number of people at NBC, specifically pairing with another manager together. And leading the teams was kind of where I was going with my career. And then when the Google opportunity came, it really had no leadership. So I really was left more as an individual contributor. And I realized relatively quickly that, I wanted that leadership component again. I wanted to grow teams. That's one of the things I found most rewarding in life, is growing people and building teams that otherwise wouldn't necessarily exist, or if they existed, wouldn't be as good as they could have been without my input. And I found the most satisfaction out of doing that, and that was one of the things I missed at Google. So once the Grovo opportunity knocked on the door, I was kind of like, you know what, this is something I want to do, and I ran with it. And haven't turned back since. It's been amazing.
Awesome. So the last question from Yitz regarding Grovo is, how are you adjusting to Slack? I hear you love it.
No, stop with that. Slack is IRC light. We have something that works. Why are we going to ruin it?
It's IRC pretty. It's gorgeous. And
no.
It's got Giphy and a number of other different things that make it amazing. In fact, I have an IRC channel set up for No Capes, and I really only ever go into IRC for No Capes, and I'm seriously considering making a Slack room instead.
No, please don't do that. Anything community-oriented should be on an open system, not some closed proprietary thing.
Okay, fair enough. I still do prefer Slack a lot.
Fair enough. Hey, teach their own. We don't all have to be perfect.
So you were talking about leadership and that being one of the driving forces that brought you to Grovo and kind of made you want to leave Google. What is it about leadership that you that you like?
It's the intangibles. All of the stuff that we do is, I don't want to say relatively thankless. We pour our hearts and souls into projects. We, emotionally tie ourselves to what we do so deeply. And even when we hit as big of a win as possible, it's still like ephemeral. We launch an amazing project. Okay, that's amazing. Now what? The couple of chances I've had to really, really touch people's lives, where, like, as a leader, I was able to help them become better than they otherwise would have been. That impact has lasted a lot longer than any project would have, and the feeling of that would. I wrote a blog post a number of years ago talking about one very specific instance where I had a developer who was reporting to me, and he pulled me aside about 2 years in and was like, "Hey, look, before I worked for this team, I never, I've been in IT for 10 to 12 years, 10, 15 years, something like that. Before working on this team, I never knew what a team was. I've always just been somebody who contributed, somebody who was there, did his job, and went home. But with the team that I built and like I had grown, he really felt like for the first time he had experienced something more akin to family at work." And I've had like 2 or 3 situations along those lines that when you feel that win and you feel like in your heart that you've made someone else's life better, that's not ephemeral. And that's something that I think really, really drives me, is to try to help other people. I don't know, I find it to be a much, much bigger win.
So from the way that you describe management and leadership, it sounds a lot more like mentoring than what you can oftentimes see from people in management. Does that make sense? Like a lot of times.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I've worked with leaders that are not mentors.
They're not leaders. No, seriously, I think it's a very important distinction to make. We tend to see management as making sure you're getting your job done. I think that's your job as an employee, to figure out how to do your job and to do it. My job as a manager is to A, enable you to do that, but B, more importantly, grow you to the role that you A, need to be in, but B, more importantly, want to be in the next 6 months to 6 years. If you want to get out of software development and you're working, me as a manager, me as the leader, my job is to help you do that. If that's your choice, if that's what you want to do, my job is to help you get to that next level, whatever that next level may be. I think we traditionally see managers in this role of ensure you do your job, ensure you stay up, you show up at the right time, ensure that you go to the meetings. I think that's, if you're competent in your job, you don't need a manager to sit down and tell you that kind of stuff. What you need the managers to help you level up. So that's kind of how I've always approached management.
I think that's probably one of the best, healthiest ways I've ever heard it described. I think the world and our industry in general would be a much better place if more managers were like that. Do you do now or in the past, or when you were not getting your leadership quota, if you will, fulfilled through your career, do you do much mentoring in the community?
Yes and no. It's something that I really try to do. I try to do informal. I haven't had the time, and this is mostly a failure on my own personal part, to dedicate how I would feel I would want in terms of like phpmentoring.org. I very much am a major supporter of it. I hang out in there and I will mentor people ad hoc. I don't like to take on formal mentor-mentee roles. It's just something I much prefer being in person for that kind of a thing. So I haven't done as much as I would like. With that said, I do work very heavily, like in the Stack Overflow PHP chat room, around informal mentorship, people who want to make changes to PHP SRC, PHP's internals, people who want to build and talk architecture. Like, I definitely do try to do that kind of mentorship, but not as a traditional one-to-one committed mentorship as, something like what would happen in PHP mentoring. I try to treat it more as ad hoc. I don't know. That gets down to what I feel like comfortable committing to.
That makes sense. I know quite a few people who do PHP mentoring, and I also know that it's not for everyone. I mean, it's a great service, and if anyone watching or listening hasn't heard of it, you should definitely go check it out. phpmentoring.org. It's also PHP mentoring on Freenode, and it's a really great community for those looking to either mentor or be mentored, or as Anthony mentioned, do it ad hoc. So speaking of the Stack Overflow chat room, which is a pretty nifty chat room where a lot of the PHP internals hang out and talk about the internals of PHP. For anyone who doesn't know, you are a internals core contributor, and you've put some pretty nifty things into the language. JT Grimes actually asked on Twitter, are you participating with internals these days? Why or why not?
Yes, I am. I very, very publicly quit back about almost 2 years ago, actually just about 2 years ago now, because of some politics. And things really haven't changed all that much. I think what's changed is me and my approach. I've matured a little bit in that time frame, and during the PHP 7 feature freeze, I saw something that really, really bothered me at a personal human level. And I stepped back in to try to prevent that from happening. Managed to get scalar types through into PHP 7, which definitely proud of, but at the same token, cost, I think, a lot more than was worthwhile to the community. With that said, I do definitely participate now. I'm doing a lot of planning around some features that I would like to see in 7.1 and 8 and so on. I definitely don't contribute as much as a lot of other people. And that's actually something that's kind of bothered me over the years, is I get a fair bit of credit from the community being an internals contributor. And then I look at other people, Peter Kelburn, for example, who tirelessly sits there and contributes, and you don't really hear his name being mentioned. And there's probably about 50 other names that I could throw out there in that, in that context. So yes, I am contributing, but there's definitely a lot of other people that deserve praise in that before I would.
So that's something pretty interesting. I know when I was just getting into PHP in the community, there are some names that stand out as being core contributors. Yourself, Sarah Goldman, Andrea Falls for a time, and there are others that I'm obviously slipping my mind. Apologize to all of you. But it is kind of, at least for me, it was pretty difficult to find a comprehensive list of these people who are, again, working really tirelessly to essentially build the platform that I do for a living. So what do you think are some good ways to give those people the recognition? Or, I mean, is there a good way to find out who it is that's building the language that we use?
I don't know, and my initial hesitation there is around a lot of people are not doing it for recognition, and recognizing them may or may not be appropriate. I think giving a channel for them to be recognized, should they choose to, is important. At the same token, I know very specifically of several people who want to contribute but have absolutely no desire to have their name recognized at all, to the point where they're actually asking for commits to be hidden, for commits to be squashed away, because they just they want to do some work, they want to impact the community, but they want to do it for their own reasons, not because of any kind of recognition. Which I recently found out last week about one particular person, and it really kind of took me back. I was like, really? I mean, but you're doing this effort, you're doing this amazing thing. Why wouldn't you want, even a little head nod, if anything? I think it's important to respect that. As far as the people who do deserve the recognition, who don't want to, I think that's something that we as a PHP internals community, and I say internals meaning the project contributors, should do a thank you post when 7 goes gold, of saying, hey, thank you to all of these people who worked, not just necessarily writing RFCs and writing patches, but did all the work behind the scenes, the release managers who take a lot of heat to do what they believe is right. Very heavily criticized they need to do, but the project wouldn't run without them. And it's important. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, I can understand people wanting privacy, or maybe just not wanting their name recognized. At the same time, I think it would, like, a lot of people, myself included, probably to a great degree, don't understand exactly how much work and effort and how many people, how many moving parts go into, the language as a whole, releasing a new feature, new major release like PHP 7 coming, exactly how much went into that. So it would be pretty cool if there was a better or an easier way to understand that.
Yeah.
Or so I think.
In fact, that's a very good idea of something to start. I'm going to take a note on that.
If you want some help, let me know. I will help.
Definitely.
So my own question, of all the things that you've contributed to internals, do you have a favorite feature or something that you added?
So honestly, it gets back to, like, one of the first things that I actually got through that was meaningful, which was the password hashing stuff. To me, that kind of hits a special mark, because I look around, and initially, outside of PHP, they kind of, when it first came out, and poked fun at, they're not, are they really doing things right? Is this really a great idea? And then 3-4 years later now, you see pretty much every other language either has something very, very similar, or has a popular library that does almost the exact same thing. And I think it's really an interesting testament to the thought process that went into that, not just by me, but by the other contributors that worked on it, that to say you can do simple, and things that are easy to use can be secure, that it's not just this, that security isn't something that you need experts to do. And I think it's been really humbling to me. I have Google Alerts set up on that, because it was also one of the riskiest changes I made. You have no idea how scared I was around pushing that change. Imagine 2 weeks into it, after it goes live and everyone's switching onto it, a massive security oversight came out. Like, imagine if that would have happened. Like, I've literally lost sleep over that. And so I set up Google Alerts on it. I have, like, on IRC mention notifications, and I've seen some horrible abuses of the system. But a lot of I've also seen a lot of very positive comments. And some of the, like, Hacker News, for example, News.y Combinator, they can be incredibly, incredibly trolly about their comments. I've actually seen them be very positive about that one particular one. So I have to say, I think that's the one I'm the most proud of, for a whole host of reasons.
Awesome. I know a lot of people who use that, so it's definitely well used. Speaking of security, JT has another question. What do you think the most common security vulnerability in live PHP sites is?
Cross-site scripting, by a long shot. It actually, I think, gets down to PHP as a core. It was originally built as a templating engine, as a templating language, and people treat it like a template language. Drupal 7, Drupal 8 both do it, and it doesn't handle escaping at all. It doesn't handle output encoding, and XSS is so bloody prevalent on the internet that that's probably the single biggest issue, simply because nobody really knows how to handle it right. I mean, Twig does a great job, but how many people are using it compared to how many people are using PHP?
That's true. Other than Twig, are there any other solutions that you suggest?
I mean, there are definitely some tools, but the more I do this, the more I see, the more I lean on tools to help, in the sense that Twig makes it hard. It's funny, I do a course on code reviewing Secure Shop, and I show people, it's actually on GitHub. If you search XSS Bad Web App, I'll drop a link to you in a little bit. I show Smarty templates, PHP templates, and Twig templates, and the cross-site scripting is reading the template, you know there's a problem. Whereas with a lot of the other templates, requires a lot more nuance. You have to think about variables, how are things being treated, and that's the wrong approach. Secure by default is the and that's something that Twig does get right out of the box. There we go.
What was
let me pop open the chat. There you go.
Cool.
Yeah, it's an application that I built that is intentionally vulnerable to cross-site scripting attack for research, for for training purposes, etc. Should be pretty self-explanatory to dig through.
So I just figured out anyone is interested and wants to take a look at it now or later. Switching gears a bit, we got another question in from Christopher Pitt. He wants to know, what is the most important thing you've learned about yourself in the last 6 months?
You're going to pull that one, aren't you? You're not going to let me off easy.
No.
What is the most important thing that I've learned about myself in the past 6 months? That being challenged is amazing. So I took a new role a month and a half ago. We talked about it at Grovo, Director of Engineering. And honestly, this is the hardest I've had to work in probably the neighborhood of 5 to 6 years. Probably even longer than that if I really think about it. But it's the longest, it's the hardest I've had to work ever, really, in the industry. And I love it. Like, I was missing this without even knowing I was missing it. It's really, really, really hard to explain without us, but working hard for something that's worthwhile is an amazing, amazing feeling. And that's something that I've been missing for a while. So I think that's where I would answer.
Of all the things you could learn about yourself, it's a pretty good thing to learn.
That, and I like Scotch.
How do you feel about it when someone mixes it with Pepsi?
Oh yeah, no, we don't talk about that.
So we actually got a question in the Q&A here. So I understand this is a hardcore PHP channel, but I wonder what your thoughts are on other competing web frameworks, more specifically Ruby on Rails.
So I'll say the same thing about Ruby on Rails that I say about PHP frameworks. I think the framework itself is abstracting the wrong things. It's funny. So whenever I do a podcast, I've done quite a few at this point, I like to listen to a couple the night beforehand of that podcast to kind of get a really interesting feel for what the dynamic's going to be, for what to expect. So I listened to the no capes that you did with Uncle Bob last night. And he said one thing in that really kind of resonated deeply with me, which was in the 90s, when we were first doing this like rapid development style, we started building these heavy duty frameworks. We started building these applications specifically with hooks in them to make change easy, to make them easy to modify later. today we do test-driven development, we do unit testing, we do other forms of architecture to help make testing change. Hence, why do we need to build all that stuff up front? You're not going to need it. Why are you putting in all these hooks? And I think that's kind of been, I don't want to say an eye-opener for me. It's something that I felt for a long time. I haven't been able to verbalize. And that really kind of resonated with me in terms of how I feel about frameworks. I think a lot of what they provide is completely and utterly unnecessary if you think about the application first. If you use, if you understand architecture even to a tiniest degree, a lot of what that framework buys. Now, that's not to say use libraries as you need, but use them when you need them. Don't build this entire monolithic structure that requires 12 levels of indirection to handle an HTTP request. And I think that's something that most modern frameworks are promoting. And I think it's incredibly, incredibly dangerous. Part of one of the reasons like Node.js is so popular is it kind of strips that out. It gives you the performance, but it also lets you kind of drive your own architecture with some interesting constraints. So if you look at like Ruby on Rails and the way the community is going with that, it's been mostly moving away from Ruby on Rails towards smaller things like Sinatra. Python's been moving away over like from Django, these big heavy monoliths, to these really, really light components. Basically, the micro framework is a router and some logging infrastructure and maybe a couple other little service layer things, but really not that much. Yet PHP has been, as a tendency, kind of keeping this monolithic framework approach. And if you look at like Laravel, CodeIgniter, a lot of the new stuff, Symfony, Full Stack, etc., and Zen Framework, it almost seems like PHP is making the same mistakes over again in terms of the framework architecture. So I like a lot of what's going on outside of the PHP world, but I also like a lot that's going on inside the PHP world. I think both are amazing, and we really need to be learning from each other rather than competing with each other.
So that's an interesting point. I often say that we would be a lot better off if we stopped. You know, you get a lot of like, oh, Ruby's better, and oh, PHP is better, and there's a lot of like interlanguage bickering. Mm-hmm. And there are things that Python does a lot better than we do.
Yep. And there are things we do a lot better than Python does.
Oh yeah, and you know, same with Ruby, and same with pretty much just about every language out there. There are pros and cons, and I think I say quite frequently that the programming world would be a lot better if A, acknowledge our strengths and our weaknesses, and B, learn from each other.
Yep.
And it'd be a lot better. Now, PHP does have micro frameworks, though.
Yep.
Do you think, is there a trend, do you think, of those getting more use? Or do you think we're trending more into the larger monolithic frameworks?
I think there's a dichotomy going on between the two. I think at some levels, yes, we are starting to get more and more adoption of micro frameworks, et cetera, but we're also getting deeper and deeper adoption of these full stack frameworks. And yeah, I think both are happening at the same time, and I think that's the interesting thing, to me at least. So there's one blog post, I just sent you a link to the blog post called Experts. I first read this about 2 or 3 years ago, and I keep coming back to it. I keep wanting to write a blog post about it. It's just so amazing. There's, I think, one paragraph in here that really nails a big part of this, this entire discussion. So, quote, "There are many people who blog and otherwise publicly discuss development methodologies and what they're working on. But there are even more people who don't. Blogging takes time, for example, and not everyone enjoys it. Other people are working on commercial products and can't divulge the inner workings of their code. That we're unable to learn from the silent majority of experts casts an unusual light upon online discussions. Just because looking down your nose at C++ or Perl is the popular opinion doesn't mean those languages aren't being used by very smart folks to build amazing, finely crafted software." End quote. The blog post is very, very, very short, but it's I don't know. I find it kind of settling in that to constantly remind ourselves the people we see talking on all sides, and very much myself included, we're the vocal minority, and that there's a lot of other people out there who are just simply shipping code. And what we may be saying, we as the vocal minority, may go completely against what they're seeing and actually doing. Yet it's the ones that do that actually move the world. So I find it very humbling and very much a reality check.
I think that's a good point. And it's something that I have to remind myself of a lot, even though I feel like I know a ton of the community, even the vocal, active, conference going, Twitter talking community, we only make up a tiny itty bitty part of PHP as a whole. So yeah, I tweeted that blog post for anyone who's interested, and I bookmarked it so I can read it later. Thank you. Okay, so more questions. We got another fun one from the one and only Jeff Caruth. What is the worst piece of advice you've ever given someone?
I give too much bad advice that I can't judge that. The worst piece of advice I've ever given someone: get involved in PHP internals. No, I kid. I've given good advice. I've given bad advice before. I've given advice that I thought was right at the time that history has definitely proved otherwise. I'm struggling to come up with something that kind of stands out as worst piece of advice, at least that I'm cognizant of at this point. I tend to block out the advice that I give people that doesn't work out. So,
well, I'm hoping that you've never intentionally given bad advice.
No. I very much don't try to. I troll people, but not to the point of like giving them advice that they think that. Yeah, no, that would be bad.
Yeah, no, just use go-to statements for everything.
Yeah, of course. Come
on. Okay, so Joe Ferguson wants to know, what's the next big game changer for PHP, like Composer was?
Okay, on the scale of Composer, I have no idea. I don't really see. I haven't seen anything that I think could ever even come close to rivaling that. I mean, you're talking about a package that completely and utterly tore down the boundaries between frameworks, that leveled the entire playing system of an ecosystem. I can't even think of anything that would even come close to that. In terms of the next big thing to come, there's definitely been a fair bit of work around what PHP either 7.1 or 8.0 might look like. Some pretty significant advancements in the type system, some pretty significant advancements around, actually the majority of the work has been around that type system, but other areas as well. I think it's a very exciting time to be around the language. I guess that's how I'd phrase that.
Awesome. So that segues well into another question from Yids. Tell us about PHP 8.
So I think one of the interesting things, the project as a whole has been moving towards smaller, more incremental releases, meaning the jump between PHP 4 and PHP 5 was astronomical. For any of you that went through it, I'm sorry. For those of you that didn't, count your blessings, because it was a pain in the neck to deal with. You had to rewrite large parts of applications. It was massive. The change from PHP 5.6 to 7 is a lot smaller. It's a lot smaller. In fact, if you've written your application well to begin with, the chances are pretty high that you don't really need to make many changes at all, if anything. And the changes that you need to make, a lot of times we can build tooling around. So I think PHP 8 will follow that kind of a trend, and so will PHP 7.1 and 7.2 and whatever they come, to the point where make it easier for people to upgrade, make it easier for people to adopt, and everybody's going to be better. We get new features faster with less risk. The core keeps moving, which is healthy for it. The ecosystems keeps following along, and with the exception of a couple member projects that don't see value in upgrading, for the most part, everybody wins. I think that's how I view 8, is not necessarily this massive refactor, this chance to break everything, but this chance to level up without causing people lots of pain.
I think that's a pretty good venture. Why, you said possibly 7.1 or 8. Why would it?
I think it depends on the features. It depends on, I think, how we as an internals group want to semantically version things. For example, I'm working on a patch right now to bring something called algebraic types to PHP, which would basically allow you to do like complex Boolean expressions on types to say, I want either an array or an iterator, or that you want either an array or something that implements an iterator and countable, basically be able to say multiple interfaces, be able to say either this or that, or this combination of things, which sounds complicated on the surface. It actually opens up a lot of doors inside and internally, and to the language itself. It's an incredibly powerful feature. But that winds up breaking a lot of things. It breaks a lot of extensions. So we might want to call that feature 8 if we even accept it. I don't, right now I'm just kind of playing around with it as an idea. That's why I say 7.1 or 8. There's been a lot of work. There's a lot of things people want to do. I think it's just incredibly exciting and motivating to see it and to be a part of it.
That sounds amazing. I want that. I think it sounds fun.
Hey.
Do that.
Working on it.
Tevin Boyd wants to know, will PHP 7 finally usher in the era of modern PHP once and for all?
Once and for all. If Composer didn't do it, PHP 7 ain't going to do it. That's all I really can say on that subject.
Okay.
No, I mean, PHP 7 is a solid evolution. The performance characteristics are amazing. It's significantly a good jump to it. But at the same token, usher in the era of modern development. If Composer didn't do that, PHP 7 is not going to do that. I mean, Composer is legitimately that good and that game-changing in terms of the community. PHP 7 is a solid evolution on it, but it's not game-changing.
Do you have a favorite feature coming in PHP 7?
Sorry, what was that?
Do you have a favorite feature that's coming in PHP 7?
Oh, everybody loves the spaceship operator.
Oh, yeah. That was totes necessary. I'm pretty excited about the abstract classes. I think that will be fun.
Yeah, definitely.
So thanks, Phil Sturgeon, for that.
Yay. Phil Sturgeon, as well as many other people.
Right.
Of course. Well, I think that's kind of one of the interesting things to point out. One of the things that we've been doing in that Stack Overflow chat room is getting together and helping people out, helping each other out to do things together rather than as individuals. Anonymous Classes was one of those efforts where Joe Watkins did the first patch, and then we're looking for users, so we bounced it back and forth. We discussed it quite a bit. Then Phil came in and took forward the proposal and went ahead and proposed it and got it in. Ultimately, it was 2 people who did the majority of the work, but it was probably about 15 people who were involved. And we did the math, and it turns out about 60% of the RFCs that went into PHP 7 came from that chat room and were community efforts around those, somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere from 5 to 15 people, depending on the individual proposal. And I think that's something that I'm incredibly proud of. The fact that, that room has been so constructive between Levy Morrison, between Bob Wayland, I'm probably butchering that name, between Nikita Popov, and a ton of other people in the room. It's just been incredible to be a part of.
Yeah, I would think that, you know, more heads in the game. I guess just the fact that it's a community effort, having more people working together may possibly be improving the quality, maybe, of features, rather than a single person or two doing it. I'm definitely in favor of that kind of collaboration. Real quick, because it keeps popping up every time your head pops up. You have some firefighter memorabilia on your wall. And today I learned that Anthony used to be a firefighter. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I was a volunteer firefighter in central New Jersey for about 5 years. Shortly after college, a couple of my friends went to it. So I kind of tagged along. I did the EMS as well. So I rode an ambulance for probably about 3 years, 2 of which were professional. It's actually kind of a funny story. So I was volunteer firefighter, and I kind of thought I wanted to make a career out of it. So I went down to apply to Fairfax, Virginia, and it's a very, very difficult job to get on. It's a fairly high starting salary for a civil service job, but it was very difficult. Like, you had to go through 9 different interviews, civil service tests, etc. So I went down, I did all the tests. I was scheduled for the final interview, which they would have given me a yes or no decision when I got the job offer for my first programming job. And basically I had to sit down that night and make a decision on what career do I want to go down. Do I want to go down paid fire? Because if I got that paid fire gig, that would have been a position for life. That's a position you retire in 25 years. Or if I turn that down, I'm basically saying I don't want to go the firefighting route at all. And I want to stick in technology and run down that road. And yes, I chose the development route, if you couldn't have guessed. I don't want to say I've never turned back, but at the same token, I love where I am now. So
can I ask, on that night with the fork in the road and you've got the fire and the code, what tipped the scales?
Honestly, I don't know. I was, oh God, how old was I? I was 25 at the time, 26 at the time. And I was thinking of the career potential, and I'm like, I think the thing that finally tipped me was, with software engineering, there's a career path, whereas with the fire department, it's a job for life. You do the same thing day in, day out. Yeah, you may get promoted every 5 years, but it's really, you're doing that same job. Whereas the software engineering, which was something I legitimately loved, is very much a career with a lot of different options, and was creative. I mean, don't get me wrong, I miss the stuff that I did in the fire department. I was a technical rescue specialist. I did a whole bunch of, I can tell you war stories out the wazoo, but it wasn't quite what I have here. So I don't know. I kind of romanticize both sides of it.
As you do. So you hear a lot of people who had passions in other industries or something, and then they become developers, and eventually someday down the road they end up marrying their passions. You ever think you're going to marry code and firefighting?
Firefighting is long past. That's, I think. So one of the things you have to understand about me is I like to hop around a lot. I tend to hyper focus on something. And I jump into things with both feet, which basically means I obsess over things. So firefighting was one of those things I obsessed for a number of years over. Photography is another one that people know that I've obsessed over, that you've seen if you follow me on Twitter. But what there've been plenty of other stuff around medicine, around. I have a pilot's license, and I spent 5 or 6 years flying and working my way up to an instructor. So I was going to do commercial airline pilot for many, many years. So when I look back on it, I definitely don't look at it as this ongoing love more than part of today. And I'm not looking to say I want to marry what's behind me. I want to marry what's in front of me. What's that next thing that's going to be that hyper passion for the next 3 or 4 years. I don't know. This is the longest I've spent in an industry in my life. I mean, the longest before this was like 2.5 years, and now I'm up to just under 10. It'll be 10 in March. So it's really weird.
Yeah, you talk about obsessing on things for years at a time. I don't. The math is. I'm having trouble with the math there because you're not that old.
There's a fair bit of overlap between them.
Oh, okay. So you're a multitasking obsessor.
Yes. Okay,
good. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Old.
No.
Okay.
I know. So you said you were 21 when you took your first programmer job? Is that right?
25.
Okay.
No. Fuck, that doesn't add up.
Yeah, the math, we're having trouble with math.
Yeah.
You were young.
Too late in the night.
You were young,
yes.
and you already really loved it. So you must have started even younger. How did you get started with the computers?
So my father was a programmer for AT&T. He worked, actually one of his first jobs was working on the systems that ultimately wound up being used during the Apollo launches, the telecommunication system side of it, to the point where like he tells stories of during the actual launches, he would have to, oh God, no. He would have to turn, basically have no work days where they were doing the launch the day before the launch. They weren't allowed to do any work. So he managed a team writing software. He taught me how to program when I was literally about 5 or 6 years old. I started writing my first code. By the time I was 7 to 8, I was fluent in C. I taught myself assembly in C. And then by the time I was 10 to 11, I was getting in trouble with, let's just say I had agencies knocking on the door asking what I was doing. 3-letter agencies. Won't get into that, but I got in a little bit of trouble here and there. And then when I got into high school, I was so deep into it and so frustrated by computers. I was just like, I don't want to do this ever again. And then went and did pilot, did security. I was security in a hospital for a while, did firefighting, bounced all around in these non-programmer jobs until ultimately I wound up falling back into it and stuck with it ever since.
Okay. So you learned how to code when you were in like kindergarten.
That time frame, yes.
What language was this?
So I initially learned on a Tandy TRS-100 laptop, which was basic. It's this little, I think it's a 13-line display laptop. And the very first program, I have no idea why I remember this, but I built a 4-function calculator. And then I started adding 5th and 6th functions to it, not knowing what the hell they did, just adding functions to it and doing weird things with the numbers. So I did that, and when I was like 7 or 8, I was also using a Commodore 64 at the time, and my dad had a rule that we weren't allowed to buy games. That if I wanted the game, I had to write the game myself, which actually kind of backfired because once I realized writing games was hard, I kind of lost interest in games. But it did, like 1 or 2 of the ones that I did, I needed better performance than I was able to get out of BASIC. So I taught myself using the manuals assembly at like 8 or 9 years old, something like that. Okay, a little motorcycle over there. Yeah, so it was really one of the things. It's funny. I'm writing a talk now called "The Life of an If Statement," where I kind of go down from an if statement in PHP and talk about how that's implemented in C and go through all the different abstraction layers to how that's like actually implemented at the transistor level and the subatomic level. But one of the things I remember very, very distinctly that like completely and utterly blew my mind is how all of the things that we see on computers can be boiled down to little on and off toggle switches. And that really kind of drove me to want to know more and want to figure out, well, how do those switches work? That doesn't make sense. Come on, you're playing a video. How is that just little things going on and off? And it really kind of drove me.
I have been eagerly awaiting. For anyone who doesn't know, I have 3 kids. My youngest just turned 4. I've been eagerly waiting for my kids to be old enough to learn how to program. My daughter and I do some Python stuff together. But now, as I'm learning, both of my sons are also old enough to learn. So I feel slightly mommy nerd shamed at the moment. So I'm going to get on that tomorrow. Apparently start teaching them basic.
Yeah. I don't mean to suggest that I was in any way a normal kid. There's a saying, if you're in IT, you're the newer you're crazy. I proved that I was crazy 20-something years ago.
Yeah, I think, there's a trend. Most of the people that I know in this field, a lot of people, not all the people, but a lot of the people that I know in this field were not 4 and 5 years old, but definitely young and tinkering with computers. And so, we've loved this stuff for ages. But you mentioned your talk, The Life of an If Statement, which, by the way, I really, really, really want to see. So you need to give it at a conference that I'm at. But that segues into something that I always talk about on No Capes, which is speaking. So how did you get into speaking?
The first talk that I gave was back in, I think, 2007. It was at Joomla, New York. No, it was a New York user group. But basically, I had hacked together a site. Basically, it got ridiculous performance requirements. I was seeing in the neighborhood of, I think, 1 to 2,000 requests a second during peak. It had to do with the site called woot.com. I built a tracker off to the side, and I'd get these very brief periods that would go on for like a day of insanely high traffic. And at the point, I knew how to program, but I'd been out of it for so long. I'd picked Joomla, and it would not scale to those kind of numbers for the cost that I had to run it with. So I spent a lot of time researching and optimizing the performance of it, and got to the point where I could legitimately get the site to handle ridiculous amounts of traffic. So I did a talk at a new user group in New York about that, about high performance PHP, high performance Joomla. And then I wound up giving it at Uni Group, which is also a New York Unix user group. And I met a couple people there who I became really, really good friends with, and encouraged me to go out in the speaking circuit for Joomla during that time period. Got involved with the Joomla community, and the rest is history. It just kind of snowballed from there. I make the joke that I felt like I got my coat caught in the train door. The train left the station and hasn't stopped accelerating since.
Do you think for that first talk, do you remember, because I know it was a few years ago, do you remember if you were nervous that first time?
I was scared shitless. No, it's still to this day. I am, every single talk I give, no matter whether it's the first time I give it, whether it's the 1,000th time I give it, whether it's in front of a brand new crowd, whether it's in front of, a crowd of nothing but my friends, I am scared going up. I've learned that once I actually make it onto the stage, I'm really, really happy. Once, it's funny, I gave, one of the largest talks I gave in recent memory was at a DrupalCon in Portland. And I remember it very distinctly because it was the largest talk I'd given. About 750, 800 people in the crowd. And it was the first time I would give the talk. And slide 2 is a joke. So I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm shaking. They introduce me, I get up, and I make the joke on slide 2, and the room bursts out in laughter. Like, it bursts out, like not just like a chuckle here or there, like honestly bursts out in laughter. And I remember this thought click in the back of my head going, you got this. And from like that moment in the talk, that moment of you're 1 slide in, 2 slides in, 30 seconds in, whatever, and you feel it click, that's why I talk. That's why I do it. It's that amazing feeling of, yes, I'm scared, but this is worth it.
Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know if you've ever had that experience of like that gel moment when like you're giving a talk where it all just clicks and you just kind of run with it.
I kind of get up on stage every single time completely scared and then just go YOLO. Um, I mean, the worst that's going to happen is I'm going to do terribly, and the likelihood of that is only increased by freaking out. So I just try to get up there and say, all right, let's have fun. And if I have fun, then generally they have fun. But yeah, that's kind of just what I do. I mean, there's that fear of like I'm not prepared enough, or I don't know enough, or all of those things. And by the time you get up on stage, you're as prepared as you're going to be, and you know as much as you're going to know.
Well, so that you said, I think, a point that is one of the things that drives me crazy. You know as much as you're going to know. People think that, oh, I'm going to conferences to hear these experts speak. We're not experts. We're not speaking because we're experts. You consider us experts because we're the ones speaking about it. And it's that weird dichotomy of, so many people who don't speak think so highly of those that do. And it's the only difference between me and that random person who's attending the conference 99% of the time is the fact that I signed up to go in front of them to speak. And I think that's a really hard pill to swallow for a lot of people.
That is actually 115% the reason why I started this podcast, was to showcase the fact that all of these thought leaders and speakers and quote unquote experts are indeed human people.
People, yeah.
We're just people. I mean, you guys are just people. We're just people. And I think, it's a double-edged sword too, because they see you on stage and they think you're an expert, and then immediately think that they are not experts and therefore they are not going to submit to speak. And then we don't get new speakers. So
yeah, it's a self-deferential cycle. Deferential is the wrong word.
It is.
Not even a word. Yeah. Self-deprecating cycle. Yes, there you go.
Yes. Self-fulfilling. I don't know what it is. But yeah, it definitely is a cycle. And it's one that I am trying really hard to break. People should definitely talk more because all of you are experts. Do you know how many talks you've given in your whole speaking career at this point?
So honestly, no. I've done some back of the envelope calculations on it, and it comes up somewhere in the neighborhood of 100. I'm not sure exactly where the exact number lies, but it's in that range.
Okay, so you've given the 3 digits of talks, and you still get scared every single time.
Every single time.
For anyone who gets scared on stage, we all do. Do you have any tips, tricks, advice that you would give to someone who is similarly scared to talk but maybe wants to?
Actually, so there's a video. Let me look it up. It's one of my favorite videos of all time. It's by a YouTuber named Vi. She is amazing. In fact, like if you've ever seen any of my YouTube videos, I very stereotypical. I'm not going to try to use that word. I stole the approach of like writing on paper from her, and if you see any of her videos, you'll realize exactly what I'm talking about. But she did a YouTube video called "They Became What They Beheld," a medium message in YouTubery, and basically what it's doing. I just posted you a link. What she's talking about is coming from a book, and it's this trend of like, she's talking specifically about YouTube, but how do you reach an audience? How do you best engage with an audience? Do you do regular scheduled things, etc.? And her whole point is artists don't do that. They share the message that they have, and if other people find that message interesting, they will attach themselves to it. Don't share completed thoughts. Share half-completed thoughts, because that leaves room for the audience to participate and to engage. It encourages that contribution, encourages the conversation. One of the things that she had said in that kind of really struck me was don't try to speak to someone else. You're the only example of a human being that you have access to. If you try to make a message for other people, you're going to fail, hands down. Instead, make messages that you yourself find interesting. And if what you say is really compelling, you will create your own audiences. So I think that's what I would say to other people out there, to people who haven't spoken or want to speak and don't know what to speak on. Write and speak to yourself. Find something that you find interesting and give a talk that you would like to see. Not that you think other people need to see or with a message you think would be interesting to them. Find something that's interesting to you and give the talk that you want to see. Because I guarantee you, if you find it interesting, that passion is going to come through. And if nothing else, other people will be entertained. But you're the only access to a human you have. Do something that you find interesting.
I think that's probably the number one advice that I've gotten from interviewing people about speaking is talk about stuff that you're inspired about and you're excited about. And that passion that you have is very infectious and people can see it and hear it when you talk about it. And it makes the talk so much better than if you're talking about something that you don't really care about or you find boring.
Yep.
Cool. So we are actually right up on time right now. One last thing I'm going to say is YOLO, Sean. Was there anything else that you had for the good of the cause, Anthony?
Anything else I had for the good of the cause?
Mm-hmm.
For the good of the cause? Which cause would this specifically be?
It's something my dad used to say. I don't know. Turn phrase, I guess. I didn't realize that wasn't a thing. Just anything else then?
Well, no, there's some causes that we could discuss, but really I would just say my biggest piece of advice that I would give anybody is just follow your passion. Don't do something because you think it's the right thing. Don't do something because you think it's what others expect. Don't do something because you think that you're going to get ahead by doing it. Do it because it's ultimately what you want to do, and do it because it makes you feel good to do. Ultimately, we only have the days that we're here for, so it's worthwhile to do what we care about.
That is perfect advice and a great way to end this episode. This has been amazing and an honor to have you on. I really thank you for coming. And thank you everyone who watched. Hope you all enjoyed it. And sorry, Europe, you guys can watch this tomorrow.
Thank you for having me on.